Welcome back to Mark Halbus Vlog, everyone. Thanks for joining in today, and thank each and every one of you guys that reached out to me to offer your condolences for my recent loss. And of course, as you guys all know, that I lost my father a few weeks back now on March 5th, and I did express that, and I do appreciate all the support and condolences from everyone out there. But today we're going to dive into the topic of what does the future look like for tuner car drivers, for people that enjoy modifying their cars, working on their cars, wrenching on their cars. I think sadly, the way the environment is going, we are all going to lose touch with that. We're possibly going to get to a place where we're regulated that it's actually illegal to work on our own cars. There's some recent updates on that very topic. We're going to talk about that. But before we get into that, let's talk about the comment from last week, and that's by Daniel, who asked the question, Mark, out of all the cars that you've had or all of your vehicles, which ones have been the most expensive to repair and maintain? So I want to dive into that right now. Let's go, Daniel. So great question, Daniel. I've had a few duds along the way. One that really comes to mind, if you guys have been watching the channel for a while, you know I had a BMW 335 that had the N54. So that was the twin turbo 6-cylinder engine. Now it was a lot of fun, and it was a 6-speed manual, rear-wheel drive. It was a great car to drive, but sadly enough, I was fixing that car every single week. Whether it was leaking antifreeze or whether it was leaking oil or there was just something, I got an engine light. There was always something going on with that car, and it was starting to get a little bit much to tolerate. As a matter of fact, in this less than 1 year of ownership, I put in about $3,000 worth of parts, and that's my price. I actually had to get some extra good pricing on that. That isn't dealer pricing. That's my thrifty pricing for the parts. And of course I did all the labor myself. So that's $3,000. If you were to double that down and take it to the shop, the repairs I did on that car probably totaled up to, in that, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 range if you were to take it to the dealer and have them do all the work I did last year. So that was a pricey car. But that's not really fair to say that on a year-on-year basis is the norm. I don't think that's the case at all. The 335, you might go for 5 or 6 years without significant repairs. And unfortunately, I landed the car at 100,000 kilometers, and they just did the fuel pump, but there was lots of other things obviously just waiting behind the corner. So sadly enough, that's just where it landed. I wound up with a whole heap of problems with that car. But as far as that goes, outside of those abnormal situations, cars that have been very expensive for me. Well, you guys know I had a Porsche 930 years ago. That car was probably arguably one of the priciest cars there, guys. I had it for probably 9 years or 10 years or something along those lines. And in that time, I did the usual stuff, wheel bearings and brakes and tires. But where it got expensive was when I had to do an engine rebuild. Now, I did that car. I did a full rebuild on it. And basically I took it to Ed, my mechanic, and once we started tearing into it, we realized there was a lot more problems than just a few of the superficial leaks, because that's actually why I took it in the first place. I knew there were some leaks. You had the oil return tubes, but there was also some other random leaks in different spots, and I just wanted to get it resealed and get it all sorted out. But once we tore into it, it became a very, very expensive proposition. As a matter of fact, once it was all said and done, I ended up that we had to go right split case because we found broken rings. So we did the bottom end. We basically did new rod bearings. We did new piston and cylinder set because there was scoring because of broken rings. The heads were totally refurbished. We put new valves, valve guides, springs, the whole nine in there, refurbished them. We also put a new clutch, put a lot of those fuel injector spacers in there, and all this kinds of standard tune-up issues. We also upgraded a few things along the way, and when it was all said and done, it cost me about $25,000. So it wasn't a cheap fix, and certainly is not a cheap car. If you buy in, own it for 2 or 3 years, and then flip it, yeah, you can get in and out of a 911 pretty cheaply. But if you hold on to a 930 or an older air-cooled 911 for a long term, you're going to be paying some dollars to keep that thing on the road and serviceable, which is what I found out. So that was arguably one of my most expensive cars to own. Loved it immensely, and unfortunately I sold it, and there's times that I think I shouldn't have, and I maybe should have kept it. I know my wife said maybe I should have kept it and just bought the Lambo and have those two parked in the garage. But anyway, we moved it on, and you can't go back now from that. So another car that I found can be kind of pricey, shouldn't be a big surprise, is the Lamborghini Gallardo. Obviously, Generally, year upon year, it's a pretty reliable car and relatively cost effective to own. I mean, if you do your own oil changes, you're talking a couple $100 in materials, and usually that's all you need to do. But you get every so often, you've got to do a whole gamut, like fuel filters. I did that, air filters. Then you do the oil and oil filter changes, and then you want to do differential fluid, you want to do transmission fluid, and all of those bits and pieces, it all starts adding up pretty quickly. Brakes don't usually wear out too quick on these cars. The E-Gear does a great job of engine braking, but eventually that'll be a costly venture, especially if you go with the carbon ceramic. But even my steel brakes can be a pricey proposition. But where the big costs in with these Lamborghinis come in is the clutch. Because these E-Gear clutches don't last very long, if you guys have been following the channel, you know I just had my car returned back from the dealer, and it cost me about 11 grand to do that. So if you spread that over the 5 years of ownership, that's $2,000 a year for every single year that I've owned that Lambo, plus tires, plus all the other incidentals. You're probably in that $3,000 to $4,000 a year if you sort of defer it and break it out a year upon year and spread all those costs out. You're probably in that $3,000 to $4,000 a year to own a Lamborghini Gallardo for a long period of time if you want to hold on to it for more than 2 or 3 years. So those would probably be my more expensive vehicles. Now the F-Type, from what I understand, can be quite pricey, so we'll see as time goes on. I love this car, so I don't see selling it right away or anything like that. I love driving it every opportunity I can. I love driving this car. It's just an absolute beast. There's really not much that you're going to say, I wish it did this or I wish it did that, because it kind of does everything you need it to do. It looks great, sounds great, it's fast as sin, and quite honestly, it's just has all the amenities you can ask for. So I know another car that can be expensive. Obviously, you guys know I have an E60 M5 that's got the glorious F1 inspired V10 engine. Those can be very expensive. Fortunately, it hasn't been yet, knocking on some really thick wooden block. Because we've only got about 58,000 kilometers on it. So we've done one throttle actuator on it, but I know rod bearings are a thing to be looking out for. You know, at that 80,000 plus kilometers, you want to start looking at that. And, you know, I mean, there's a lot of other things, vanos, solenoids, and all kinds of things that can go on those cars. So I would expect that to be a pricey car, and the cost will catch up with you as well. And it runs on run flats, so if you maintain the run flats, that's an expensive proposition. And we're also talking about a $2,500 windshield when it breaks, and mine did last year just because of, or 2 years ago, because of a rally we went on, and I caught a rock from a Corvette that was in the rally. So now we have to do a windshield on it. So it can be an expensive car to repair and replace and maintain as well. So those are really my top three, if you will. Would I trade any of them in? Not a chance. At this point, I love each and every one of them. And so the cost of maintenance is well worth the cost of admission. I mean, ultimately, those cars are just absolutely amazing. So that's truly why I keep them. And that's also why the 335 hit the road, because as good as it was, it just still wasn't good enough to overcome the costs that I was incurring for maintaining that junker. So anyway, back to the topic of what's going on and how do-it-yourselfers like you guys and me are going to start possibly getting shorted out. So what we're really diving into is all about the California Clean Air Act, and specifically, we're talking about Sacramento. Have you guys heard about what's going on down there? So they've got a program, they're buying back junkers, they're giving you up to $9,500 for your old 15-year-old car. There's all kinds of different programs. They want to clean up the road from gas-willing, oil-burning sweat hogs. So they're trying to get rid of all the old junk. So that's fine. That makes sense. And after all, we all want to do our part to try to keep the air clean, because after all, we've got, you know, our generation is one thing. We're getting crusty and old, but we have kids, and a lot of us are going to have kids. And either you have kids today, maybe you'll have kids in 10 years from now. Whatever that is, the next generation, you want to make sure they have a clean earth to live on. So I get the whole process, and that's what they're doing, is trying to keep the air clean. But apparently what's going on, sort of buried in the legislation there, is in Sacramento, what's going to happen is you are no longer, as a do-it-yourselfer or a tuner, going to be able to work on your own cars in your own garage with your own tools. Can you believe that? I mean, I'm going to be the first to admit I'm a bit of a do-it-yourselfer. I'm a bit of a wrencher and a little bit of a tuner. Now, I'm not going to be the guy that's going to be swapping engines on a weekend, although that's what they're trying to hit. They're trying to stop those do-it-yourselfers. They don't want to see people doing engine swaps, doing big tunes, making body modifications. They don't want to see that. They've made exemptions. They're okay with people doing an oil change or changing your brakes. That's fine, a little bit of that work. But apparently there's talk that they consider air compressors, impact wrenches, torque wrenches. None of those are considered day-to-day tools and are going to be considered banned. Do you suppose that they're starting to infringe on our personal rights? It's starting to sort of feel that way. And I don't want to be sounding all political and whatnot, because quite frankly, I don't really care about politicians. I do my own thing on a day-to-day basis. But now we're starting to infringe on the things that we do in our own garages, with our own tools, with our own hands, is starting to be challenged. We are starting to get that pushback from areas like Sacramento. I mean, I like doing some of my own work. As a matter of fact, you look at the F-Type there, I might leave it stock, but I also like to know that if I want to change some parts on it to make it a little faster, maybe do a tune and a pulley and possibly an exhaust system on it, that I'm not going to have some goofy government official tell me that I can't touch my own car, that this goes against everything that we've grown to appreciate in the free world. But I also did some modifications to the Lamborghini right here. If you guys have been joining part of the channel for a while, you'll notice not just vinyl upgrades, I've done some superficial changes, but even changing the exhaust on this too. Now it has an aftermarket tubey exhaust to make it sound better. It may not satisfy certain emissions regulations in certain parts of the country, but for the most part, a muffler is just about volume. I haven't changed the cats out on this, but conversely, if you guys know about my 335 BMW I just spoke of, that thing was modded up the yin-yang. I actually did cat bypass, muffler bypass. I did a JB4 tune, which allowed more tunability and provide more output with higher boost, more fueling. So there's no question the car would potentially spew out a little bit extra carbon emissions. But look at some of the other contributors to the carbon emissions. How about a jet airplane? When it takes off, do you know how much fuel gets dumped into the atmosphere? Or how about the ocean liners? Talk about an inefficient means of transportation. Those are where the real emissions are coming from in terms of moving people and cargo down the road. Now, fortunately, there's other groups like SEMA, for example, that are starting to challenge the question about this whole situation. The thought being, of course, saying, hey, what if we relook at this from a different set of goggles? Maybe a lot of these cars that are modified are dedicated for the track. Can we allow that to happen? So those questions are being asked, and they're looking for loopholes to allow people to continually tune their cars. Because since movies like Fast and the Furious have come out, the tuner world has never been stronger than it is today. And quite frankly, I love modifying my cars, at least partially, right? I'm not necessarily doing the full meal deal, but it's nice to know that you can take it, do some things, make it sort of unique for yourself, and then move on. And so ultimately, they're pushing for zero emissions, and I gotta think that that's a great thing. I mean, to have clean air that we can all breathe, and knowing that our kids and our grandkids are gonna have clean air as well to breathe. Some of the filthiest cities with the heaviest smog were starting to clean up during this whole crisis where everybody had to stay home because nobody was driving. And it proved that the lower emissions created a cleaner breathing atmosphere. So that's always a benefit. I do, however, think that electrics and battery-operated vehicles aren't necessarily the answer either. The infrastructure is not there. Could you imagine if you had a 100-amp charger at every house in this neighborhood? Could you just imagine looking down there, the kind of power it would take to charge everybody's car simultaneously? So we know that's not the solution. Not only that, what do you do with the seleniums and the leads and all those ugly heavy metals that they're oring? So they're ripping up the earth to grab all these heavy metals to create these batteries. And then once the batteries are consumed, if you can't reuse them, where do they dump them? In the ground? Backfill them? Where does all that heavy metal go in high concentrations? That's going to create other problems. So I really do believe this is a fine balancing act between the big oil companies that are trying to maintain massive profits, and of course some of the new green energy programs that are trying to get some legs to them as well. Everybody's trying to balance this on a knife's edge. But ultimately, when you eliminate some of these industries, you're not just impacting the oil industries, even the SEMA and the aftermarket tuning market. That's $1 billion market. That's just for people that like to put different wings on their cars, and they like to put different engines in there and turbos and short shift kits. Things like that can now be hampered because you can't even do that yourself. And that's going to be a problem. So now people in that industry are going to have to get creative. Where's the next industry lie? And the other hand is, I can't even imagine, honestly, 10 years ago, I never thought that we'd be talking, or we'd be this close to the end of the proverbial road in terms of driving cars and the exciting car driving experiences. For example, like the F-Type here. It is loud, it's obnoxious, burns fuel, yes, but that snap, crackle, pop comes from the fueling. How do you get that from electrics? You don't. It's like driving a utensil down the road. It's an appliance. It's like a vacuum cleaner, like a blender. It's like your electric toothbrush. It's just going to sit there and hum, and you're not going to get the same excitement from it. And to think that lots of countries are starting to mandate that change, so that we're talking about 10 or 15 short years, and we'll be in a world where it's pure vacuum cleaners on the road, and cars like this will at that point be obsolete. So today I really didn't want to get into a whole political debate, because I do believe in clean air, and we want to have clean air for the future. We want to have clean air for grandkids and our kids, and that's definitely where we want to land. My bigger concern is how we're getting there, and the fact that people are now being mandated and forced in their own personal homes with their own personal property in how we manage our own assets. The same thing goes for everything. Do you realize when we're born we have $0? You spend your life, you go to school, you go to work, you develop a salary, you earn money, you build a small nest egg, buy a couple of assets, a house, a car. You never really own it. Do you realize that? I'll give you an example why. You buy a house, maybe after 25 years, you pay for the mortgage, the house is finally free and clear. You're all good to go. But guess what? Defer on your taxes for 5 years and they'll take your house away, which means there's nothing left. Also, there's recent updates I've heard here locally in their income tax system. If you die, if I croak, my house gets handed off, even if I hand it through a will, there's taxes now looking at being implemented that will charge the receiver of my house as much as 60 or 65% of the value of that property. Could you imagine? So what are they saying? They don't want you to have anything. But unfortunately, as I say, the problem has to do with infringing on our rights. And that's my ultimate debate and question. And what do you guys think? Do you think that's right for areas like, for example, Sacramento to implement these sorts of changes? I mean, after all, this is ultimately, inevitably going to spill over to the masses. There's no way that that's not going to start rolling over into the rest of California and then into other states around it. Give it enough time, you watch, and it won't even be that long, because look how fast and furious the changes of electric vehicles have come on. The changes in technology and the push for green energy and green energy solutions is coming in, and like I said, within 10 or 15 years, you're gonna see a whole new world. So guys, let me know what your thoughts are on this whole situation. It's a very polarizing topic, because on one hand, like I said, we want a clean earth. On the other hand, there's still the conversation of our personal rights and freedoms. Drop a line. I'd love to hear from you guys, and I hope to see you on the next one. See you then. Bye-bye.